Hello, hello, hello. So Patty's passing out the power and control wheel we talked about towards the end of the last time I spoke, and then where we started talking about just different dynamics within that. I like this power and control wheel because it adds a spiritual component to it. When we use biblical stuff, sometimes biblical verses, to have power and control over people. So that's what we kind of covered last time. Patty has got, which other ones do you have? Oh, no, here they are. This is for this week. So we tried it once with raising our hands and sharing. I kind of like that because it's more interactive. But then we also did where we wrote it on a sticky note, and some people like that. And so we're kind of doing both this time. So it's whatever floats your boat. I like the interactions. So if you want to share, if you could raise your hand so we can get you recorded for the people watching online, that would be wonderful. As we kind of go through. So if you have something you need to share, want to share, please do. If you have something you want to share, then we try to take a little bit at the end of session to go kind of through those questions. And one I got last time, and I thought I'd point this out at the beginning here because I really liked it. And so this individual said, I'm interested in looking at how agency mostly benefits boy, I cannot read that word. What is that word? Right there.
How agency mostly benefits agents, but that
they may be unrecognized costs or wounds as well. I recently came across as journal entry. Anyway, they came across a journal entry and talked about the burden of being the one people were looking to for basically our decisions and stuff. So this person is talking about like coming across something where they realize like how much of a burden is for the person with agency sometimes to carry it. And we don't always understand that, and we don't look at that very well because we talk a lot about targetship, right? But we don't always talk about agency. And I included in one of the, I think you guys got it in the very first handout, it said extras. I included a video by Justin, and it is an extra YouTube type video by Justin Baldoni, Why I'm Done Trying to Be Man Enough. And it's on TED Talks. And it's all about, he's like talking about this idea of like agency and how it actually affects him as a man, and that he wants to sometimes not carry that agency. And so he kind of talks about that a little bit. So it's a great video. I think it's about 15, 20 minutes maybe in length. So something to check out, because agency, when we're looking at patriarch, we're looking at agency. When we look at not having voice, and for those people that have voice and other people that don't have voice, what happens is we don't realize that this is about all of us. And I've said that from the very time we met. This is about all of us, and that it affects all of us. And so this is what happens is when people, sometimes we have these discussions and we end up thinking, oh, this is about man hating, or this is about people with money hating people with money or houses. And it's like, it's not about that. It's that we're all on this boat together, and we all got a paddle in our hand, and we all got to figure how we're going to make it go. And so we all have to own our stuff in order to support one another. So I like what Pastor Peter today said during a sermon. I was thinking about this testimony I heard by this Jewish lady that my sister sent to me at one time. I don't remember her name, but she was talking about her walk and journey to coming to Christ. And she said that she remembers being in this moment where she heard God's voice, and how pure and majestic it was, and how terrifying and horrible it was, all at the same time, because to experience something pure and so amazing is also just so overwhelming to our senses that you can't even imagine trying to carry it with our human bodies. And it reminded me of Moses up on the mountains and him coming down and all that. I always think of that when I hear that story because it's just amazing. So, hearing voice. Okay, so quick review. I always like to do the reviews. We're going to try to get through this. We've got a lot to cover today, again, like usual. We talked about, first time, we talked about agency and targetship, right? We talked about who has voice, who's losing voice, right? We talked a little bit about understanding the skill sets of agency and targetship and understanding how we create voice. The other thing Pastor Peter said today, which I really like, is Moses was basically listening and Jesus was talking, right? These are my commandments. These are, right? And Moses is quiet and listening, right? It's God's turn to speak. And so I think it's like, I think about that as far as like, this journey that we're on as Christians is it's learning how to use our voice, when we need to speak and when we need to step back and allow others to be heard and speak. And what does that look like? So, okay. So we kind of talked about that in the first thing. We talked about, Pastor Peter talked about our tongue, right? And his thing about it can create, it destroys, has power, right? And that kind of ties into that having voice. And that we're created in God's image. We talked about that. We began to take one example and talk about patriarchy. Sorry, I make up my own words when it comes to it. And so we started talking about that as an example of like agency and that. I would have loved to have done other topics. I couldn't find anything else out there. That's just a common one that's pretty well out there. And then we talked about the power and control wheel, and we finalized that. And then last week you talked about, I love it, the law, right? Vocation as a calling, voice, right? Where we can use our voice, not just in the church, but in our community and everywhere, right? So our voice through calling. Okay, so today, you guys got the next handout. So that's where we are at. So we're going to talk about, and I found this kind of interesting. We're continuing with a little bit more in the book. I have a lot to cover today. We'll see how far we get on it. Some of it I know I'm just going to hand out at the end, so that's fine for your own exploration. I thought it was interesting. We're going to start, we finished with power control wheel, the household codes. How many people knew there was something called the household codes? Nobody. I didn't know it either. This is new information to me. I didn't know it until like a month or two ago. But the household codes is what consists of instructions, usually writings under the Apostle Paul and Peter, and the idea of we talked about the hierarchy, and the opposite of God is not hierarchical, right? We talked about that this isn't about hierarchy, and how Christians back in modern day kind of understood that. We're going to talk about that today a little bit and how that goes. But the main foci of the household codes are upon husband, wife, parent, child, master, slave relationship. And so this kind of reminded me of the clobber verses, because we have these specific verses we pull out of the Bible, and we use that to support this idea of, behavioral, instead of that we have to perform in certain behaviors in certain ways. Instead of that, it's not through works or behaviors, it's just through God's grace, right? That we come to know him, right? There's nothing required of us. So anyway, so these household codes, right? So you see down there, John Merck, a medieval priest during the 14th, 15th century, does not declare the ring as a symbol the wife should obey the husband. I kind of mentioned this at the end of our last session. So it's not a symbol that the wife should obey the husband. It is a reminder for wives to put God first, because husbands sin and often proved poor leaders of their wives. So we go to today's wedding ceremony, I mentioned that, and we've totally taken that, we've kind of flipped it, haven't we? So we don't really look at it that way. But that's originally was done by John Merck back in the 14th, 15th century. And when the rings were put on, that's what he presented, was that that we're to look to God first. And it was a reminder of that. And so we've kind of changed that up a little bit over the years. The code apparently were developed to urge new first century Christians to comply with non-negotiable requirements of the Roman Patria. Go ahead, say it.
Roman Patria Potestas law.
Patria Potestas.
Patria would be father.
Yeah, law. To meet the orders of the church. So this wasn't original. It came along later. It came along in the Roman times. And so I listed out there, I'm not going to go over each verse, but I gave you guys a list of the verses that are part of the household codes. You can see right there that are often used to support. You can see that we have Ephesians, wives submit to their husbands. We have Galatians, focus on family and home. 1 Timothy, not to teach or exercise authority over men. Titus, to be workers at home. I don't know what 1 Corinthians 14. I didn't get that one on there. And 11, have been taught that God designed women to follow male headship. And so these are the household codes that we refer to when people are talking about understanding role of submission in the households and stuff, and within the church. So part of this is that, so this has been really to define the role of what it is to be a heterosexual married couple. This really isn't defined in same-sex partners because we don't really follow the same stuff. But one of the things that a more positive thing that happened is that a lot of people take this and go, this is, Paul wasn't imposing the Roman patriarchy on Christians. Peter and Paul's message was a radical Christian remix to tell Christians how the gospel set them free. And I got an example here for you guys. So we're going to pass out these examples. And this is from the book itself. The first 2 pages, and the last page is just something I pulled on. It's from the New English Standard Version. You can see it there. But I like this because it really kind of gives a good example of what we're talking about with Paul's remix. And what is Paul's remix? And how does Roman law, and what is Paul talking about? And then how is it a remix? And so, if somebody could kind of read, anybody open a reading today? Where's the microphone at? You will? At home, where it starts at home, right there. So this what we're going to read is by one of the consul members that opposed to repealing this law under the Roman law at the time under Caesar Augustus. And so this is his thing. So let me give you a little bit of image what's happening at this time. This time there's a lot of protests going on in Rome. There's a lot of things that are happening. Women are like on street corners. They're protesting. They're raising their voices. And that is all going on within the churches, this idea of gifts, right? The gifts and who gets gifts and who doesn't, who has better gifts and all that stuff, right? And so that's all kind of happening at this moment. But, and socially, it's kind of following the movement, what's happening socially as well. And we see this again and again. We see that today with movies. When we talk about certain movies, you see more. When we were looking in the 80s and we were dealing with Russia, we saw a lot more Russian movies. Right. Yeah, right? So this is context of kind of how things happen as things kind of follow what's happening socially or culturally. So this is one of the consuls, Cato the Elder, speaking about not wanting to appeal this law. And so he's talking to the people in the community in Rome.
At home, our freedom is conquered by female fury. Here in the forum, it is bruised and trampled upon. And because we have not contained the individuals, we fear the lot. Indeed, I blushed when, a short while ago, I walked through the midst of a band of women. I should have said, what kind of behavior is this, running around in public, blocking streets and speaking to other women's husbands? Could you have not asked your own husband the same thing at home? Are you more charming in public with others' husbands than at home with your own? And yet, it is not fitting, even at home, for you to concern yourself with what laws are passed or repealed here. Our ancestors did not want women to conduct any, not even private business without a guardian. They wanted them to be under the authority of parents, brothers, or husbands. We, the gods help us, even now let them snatch at the government and meddle in the forum and our assemblies. What are they doing now on the streets and crossroads if they are not persuading the tribunes to vote for repeal? If they are victorious now, what will they not attempt? As soon as they begin to be your equals, they will have become your superiors.
Yeah, intense. Those women protesting, right? So I'm going to take you back to the last page of that handout. I'm going to skip the middle one. Like I said, I'm going to skip some stuff here just because of time, and we've got a lot to cover. And so this is the thing where you're going to see in an English Standard Version, this first one is really that right there, wives and husbands, right? And it's in connection to what we just heard read. And I kind of marked it out on you guys for you guys to see it broken down. There's Roman law, and there's contrary to law, that Paul says, right? And you see that. There's Roman law, there's contrary to the Roman law. And so there's a few here. The last one I got cut off because I threw away the last page. I was doing this really quick last night. So who can read this first one, wives and husbands? Somebody else want to read for us in the mic? Right there.
Go hold it right to your chin.
Wives, submit to your husbands as the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Roman law. Should I read the next one?
Give me a sec. So you see how that sounds really similar to what we're hearing at this time. This is the same time that Paul's writing this. That's happening in Rome. You see, you can hear that, right, with what Paul's saying. Okay, now the next part.
Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed by her by the washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, and that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.
Yeah. So this is profound. I like that. He says the mystery of this is profound, right? This is profound because it was what was not happening socially. So you have to understand during this time, the Christians rejected pagan customs and Hellenistic religions, right? Christians preaching about the new Jesus sounded like a revolution, right? We're still doing this, we're still sounding like revolution. It doesn't end, we're still doing that, right? Christians were often very unpopular and religious persecution of them had begun. So you see, all this stuff is starting to happen. So when Paul's telling us this, he's actually speaking out contrary to the Roman law and what he's saying there. He's calling us to be outside of the world. And we mentioned that, I think I mentioned that about, 3 weeks ago, the second time I talked, was that, we're being called outside of what's, we're called outside of the world. And so sometimes we think that when we're doing this, following this, and we're taking this we're taking a little bit out of context when we're not seeing it as Roman law, and then we're seeing it as contrary to that Roman law. we're now taking it and we're bringing the world's view into the church, and so the church view out into the world. And so it's kind of the opposite what we're seeing. Anyway, so
Back for a minute.
yeah,
I think you talked about this, but it probably slipped on by me.
right,
What was this law that they wanted to be repealed?
yeah. So it's the Roman Patria. Well, Pastor Peter will say it. He pronounces it better. I don't. I slaughter it.
I don't have it in front of me,
Oh.
the Patria, yeah, Patria Potestas. I wonder if it's supposed to be Protestus, but yeah.
Protestus law. Yeah.
But Patria would be father. Yeah, if Patria, I have no
Hey.
idea what the law was. I don't know what that is. I just know Patria means father.
Yeah, so I'm going to go into a little bit of it. Out of it came like what's called the Opium Law. OPP, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong because I'm horrible at pronouncing it. It's OPPIAN law,
Oppian?
Oppian. It was part of the Roman, it was part of this code.
Okay.
And so what it was is it was about, I got it right here. It was all about that, at that time what had happened is Rome had just come out of a really serious war where they lost like more people than in World War II in one day. And so they got slaughtered. And money was really harsh. They were having a hard time. But with all the husbands passing because they were out at war, women are having more financial gain, right? We talked about this kind of like during after World War II, we talk about, right? And so what happened is Rome really wanted to take and set these laws because these women were going out and they were having fun. They're showing off, they're wearing lots of glamorous, and they're wearing clothes, and they're like drinking and partying and riding in the chariots. And so they passed these laws where you couldn't do that because there was a lot of hardship going on in Rome too at the same time. And so they didn't want them doing that at all. And so part of the opium laws was that, I'm going to call them opium. I don't know. Anyway, part of the laws on that was just to stop the protesting. It was to stop them from having voice, and to keep them in their place. And so a lot of the laws that came along, and during this time, women's bodies were seen as disfigured men.
Right.
So they weren't men. They were disfigured men. So there was a lot of things going on at that time. And so with Rome being kind of cash
I'm going
strapped.
to jump in real quick,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
that's one of the things I remember learning in studying LGBT issues and kind of at the time of Paul and the time of Christ, is it was not seen as shameful if a man penetrated another man was still seen as masculine because you were penetrating. What was shameful was to be the one receiving because now you are as a woman. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't have this distinction of, well, gay sex makes you gay. For them, it was about power.
It was about power.
And notice, not being as shameful as a woman. To be in the position of a woman was what was shameful.
Right.
Because a woman's body was seen as
Deformed and weaker and yeah.
weak.
Yeah.
So as long as you were in the male position, you were still seen as it had nothing to do with gay.
No, and
It
just
had
like we
everything to do
talked,
with
Sodom
power.
and Gomorrah is the same thing, right? We go back to
Right.
Sodom and Gomorrah. It was about power and control because there's another story kind of similar to Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't remember what book that's in, but is it in Ephesians? I don't remember. Pastor Peter's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I was reading this morning and torn. It was in there. Anyway, so that's what was kind of happening, and that's what the laws were about, is about really creating, like, putting women back into their place. It's just like after World War II, we kind of looked at women at work until the wars ended and then the rules changed, right? Until then, we were seeing posters, go out there, Rosie the Riveter going out there, right? And all that. And then all of a sudden, it's like men are coming back from war and it changes. And we're seeing that same thing happening in Rome. History repeats itself. We're seeing the same thing. And so laws were similar to that. So
I just got I was going through my dad gave me, it's an old time magazine for the World's Fair with pictures of the Space Needle and everything, 1962. It's really interesting. All of the advertisements are shiny kitchen appliances with women standing there in their house dresses, happy next to their appliances.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
you
high
think,
heels,
so
yeah.
you just think about culturally from Rosie the Riveter in the 40s to here you are standing in your kitchen next to your brand new dishwasher in 20 years
Right.
later.
20 years later, right, and how that changed, yeah.
The confusing thing here for me is that the assumption seems to be that women had more rights prior to these laws, and that the laws were taking away their rights. Is that correct or not?
Well, women did not have more rights before the laws, but because of the war and the transition that was happening, women were beginning to get more rights. And then there was another change that happened where now everybody's back from war because they're not winning and they're being defeated and they're coming back, and now they have to begin to change. Same thing that happened during World War II. But instead we won, right? But now we got to come back and we got to rechange things again. So we passed laws to do that. And we see this throughout history when we're talking about people that are under targetship and people that are under agency, right? And our government and how they support this, right? And this is why targetship and agency is not something we go, oh, I want to be an agent. I want to have that agency. Give me a sec. Let me get you a mic. Hang on. I want to hear what you have to say. Yeah.
I took economics 10 in Los Angeles Mission College, and they said that the women's had more rights. And this is before they had all the civil actions taken in the 1900s here because of the queens and the kings, that the women were over the men at that time.
Yeah, they did have a period of time where that happened, and then it kind of shifted again. So, you have to think about this as things aren't stagnant. You don't usually gain. Every time you gain, you take steps back. We saw this, with the gay movement kind of during World War II, right? People in Germany were able to register and all that, and then all of a sudden they, are now in concentration camps having experiments done on them, and so that was a large population there. And they were marrying in Germany. We see that, I'm trying to think of some other aspects. The suffragette movement, right, where women wanted the right to vote, right? I have written down here on the second page of your handout today is the Reformation. So the Reformation is like, this is a good thing, right? But what they found is that women actually were the economic base of their families, and they actually created brewing and made a lot of meat and different things for people, and that brought in a lot of economic base to the families. But all of a sudden, the Reformation was good in many things, right? But it also started when that happened, in which it narrowed the economic options for women. So with a lot of things that it also provided, it also took away. And that's oftentimes we see today, things that happen, different laws we pass, there's good things that come out of it, and then there's bad things, right? It's never just all good or all bad. It's usually both, So, and that's probably what they're talking about was during the time then under the kings and queens, because that's what they were able to do is women did have a more economic base. They did have more say in the household and different things like that. Yep. Yeah. So then you see this also in the Industrial Revolution. Again, economic and political powers come in, laws pass, right? Men, as we see people going out to work in the field, men are going to go out and work, right? Labor. Men go out to work, women are home. So laws are passed in favor of that, but then it isolates on the other end, right? So we see this imbalance happening again and again and again. And I like this, she talks about in the book, this is really about big rooms versus small rooms, right? That these big rooms, there's big rooms and then there's small rooms, and then there's big rooms and there's plenty of space created for people to thrive, right? I think about this on, we talked about targetship like early on disabilities and ableism, right? How many of you have traveled overseas? We've got it pretty good here in the States. I can't imagine having a wheelchair. I think about that every time I go over there and I've traveled, I see I can't imagine having a wheelchair trying to get around in this. We were in Sweden not too long ago, and they had this steep marble incline for a wheelchair. It had 2 handles on the side, and I thought I'd be just like, holding on, going down that thing. It was steep. I was like, I can't imagine doing that. Somebody on the other end pulling to hold back. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, so we talk about, even then we have these isms, right, going on. And so I'm going to finish this part up and kind of move on. So I love on the last part, and this is kind of on the book, in the book. We talked about Paul's remix. Let me see here. I was going to just want to make sure I cover everything real quick on what I wanted to today on this. And I kind of want to leave this behind because I want to get into this whole thing of, okay, we have this information. Now what do we do with it? And how do we have voice? And that's kind of one of the things that's really what this is about, right? There's a point why we're talking about this, not just to say where we've lost our voice and there's nothing there. We want to talk also about where to have voice and how we can have voice. But anyways, the very last paragraph. And I like how she says this. This is the author of the book. Patriarch should have little bearing on marriages today, where hopefully unequal power has been replaced with mutual submission and reciprocal love and respect. However, to pretend that this isn't a reality would lack moving into allyship with others in the way our faith has directed us to do so as Christians, right? So what we're seeing is that we need to take it's hard to sometimes think about like these things and feel like when you have agency that it's not some sort of criticism. And that's not what it is. It's like, how do we take what we have, not because we assigned it, because society signed it through the laws and through how they pass and how they see things. How do we take that and as Christians fulfill and live out what God called us to do, unconditional love towards one another? That's what we're really talking about here. How do we take that? So, any thoughts, any questions on that?
You had in one of your resources the TV show called Shiny Happy People.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the breakdown and follow-up of the Duggars. So the original show was called 16 and Counting, 12 and, what was it? The original Duggar show was...
There was a bunch of them out around that time.
I could go on forever.
Right.
There's like the original, they just had a little, like they didn't get picked up, and then they had like 14, 15 kids in counting.
It's
And
the,
then last one was
yeah.
19 kids in
So it's the if you don't know the Duggar family, the Duggar family had 19 kids, and so every year the show's name changed, 16 and counting, 17 and counting. What we didn't know was behind the scenes was all of the biblical patriarchy, and it was really interesting how it was they had in all of the textbooks for the kids and in the teachings, it was this umbrella. And if Christ is the umbrella, and it's pure hierarchy. Under Christ was the husband, and then under the husband was the wife, and under the wife was the
Kids.
The kids.
And
So if you knew anything about the Duggars, it was really interesting
Right.
watching the kind of this
Right, but at 12 and 13,
exposing it with this shiny happy people.
But-
But it's where the purity culture, and Sarah and I were watching it going, we didn't realize
Yeah.
how much our own preteen and teenage years growing up in the church were shaped by this purity culture stuff. The purity culture stuff is coming out of this same shiny happy people Duggar stuff. We didn't realize. We're like, oh, that wasn't us. And we're like, oh my gosh.
It was us,
How
yeah.
much it did in the churches that this purity culture has infected so much of we were. And you brought out the point then that what's really hard is when the son, as a child, is supposed to be under the mother until when he reaches a certain age.
usually about 12, 13, because they're
There's
starting
this
to come into
liminal.
manship.
There's
right? They're
this.
starting to
It's
become a
all
man.
about power, and so there's this liminal period where when a boy starts to hit puberty, is he under mom or is he above mom in the hierarchy? And you
He
can end.
begins to exercise his authority over mom by having a voice and we do that because women aren't, we use these household codes. Women aren't allowed to preach in church, so therefore any messages you receive from mom is false, even if it's not religious based. anything you receive from mom is false. You need to validate and get that feedback from me as the father. Yeah, we see this huge, and we see it more in the evangelical movements. We see it, but it's actually, we don't speak about it as much, and it may not be as vivid, as visual, but we see it throughout all faiths. Yeah.
It's no surprise to me then that the oldest Duggar son, who was the one that was guilty of sexually molesting all of the younger siblings, hit some pubescent age
Yeah.
where mom couldn't question him, the other siblings couldn't question him. He then was able to exercise authority and power, and of course it was
Yeah.
abuse.
Yeah, there's a great book out there right now. I'm reading slowly because I'm reading too many things at one time. But Pure is called Pure, and it's about the purity movement and how it actually, when they really begin to look at the purity culture, how it takes away voice. It's not really giving voice, and how it actually can perpetuate a rape culture.
Right.
Yeah, that's what they're finding. And they kind of talk about that in Shiny Happy People. It's, right, so, yeah, it's not, yeah. And it was in contrary, when that movement started, it was in contrary to birth control, right? The idea that we're going to give birth control. And then we can go on and on. Because that ties into something, a lot of the women at work and different things like that, yeah. And so, yeah. So there's a lot of different stuff.
Something's gone wrong when we can't distinguish between Christian culture and rape culture.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that. And that's what this is about. I mean,
I think we went astray.
Maybe we went a little bit astray. Maybe, and that's the thing is we're called to be outside that, but I think it goes back to this idea of works, that salvation is through works, and that's not accurate. Like we preach, and I've heard this so many times. I love what you said today. We hear it so many times in the church. We preach about God's forgiveness, a grace that's given, that there's nothing that we have to do to receive it. But then we're going to monitor everybody's behavior, or there's shame around everybody's behavior. I know many people that smoke that, sneak out or, go behind the building because they're a little bit more private to smoke. So yeah, and it's like, where's that line? That's the hard part, is where's the line in this? How do we give voice? How do we use our voice? And this is one thing, we can't determine. I can't get up here and tell you how to use your voice. I can give you information. I can support that. We all have levels of targetship. We all have levels of agency. But in either role, it doesn't matter. How are you going to use your voice? And are you going to take moments and choose to not use your voice and use your ears, right?
When we first moved to Centralia in 1970 something, 73 or 4, I went to the college and suggested I offer a course in the evening called Assertiveness Training. Assertiveness Training. And I wanted to call it Assertiveness Training for Women. But anyway, the college told me no, that they didn't think that was something the community would be interested in. And this was in the 70s. So then I said, well, how about assertiveness training? And forget the women. And they thought about it and finally said, okay.
Yeah.
So I taught classes up at South Puget Sound and down here in the evening for a couple of years. And they became extremely popular, a popular class, mainly women that came. But some of the churches started saying that their members shouldn't attend, their women shouldn't attend. So, you try to think about, this was back a long time ago. But, I'm talking about the 70s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember my mom growing up in the 70s. Yeah. 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 I remember my mom going through stuff like that. And divorce, right? The same thing with divorce. And anyway. Yeah. And so I was gonna talk about leading into, I was going to talk about women of the Bible. And I look at this is Wikipedia, but I loved it because it had, I don't know how much they're supposedly getting better at checking their facts. But all these women, pages and pages are all women in the Bible to some aspect. But we have these women in the Bible, Deborah, and we have the Proverbs woman. I mean, the Proverbs woman, I mean, you talk about a woman using her voice, you know. Proverbs 31 woman, you know. These are women that use their voices. Deborah, you know, a judge, you know. And so we have to remember that, you know, so when we start talking about being voiceless in our isms, right, and we're talking about one particular part of that right now, of voiceless as far as women, right? But we have voiceless as far as homeless. We have voiceless as far as economic base, right? We talked about that, right? And so it doesn't really align when we think about women in these places being able to have voice and using their voice. And it doesn't really align with the women that we see in the Bible, that they should be silent, right? So again, that just leans more to the remix of Paul, you know? So, okay, so I'm going to move on. Okay, so let me make sure I have one. Yeah. So here's the next handout. This here is learning how to use your voice. And I you know, part of it as a counselor and learning how to use your voice, a lot of times I teach something called dialectical behavior therapy. Dialect meaning two opposing thoughts at one time. I think we talked, maybe I've shared that here a little bit, maybe comments or something. Dialect, two opposing thoughts, right? I want to obey my husband, but yet I have something to say, or I'm not being heard, right? And I don't know how to speak up and hear it. I want to be able to attend, I want to go on a mission trip, but how can I share and hear my voice when there's roads I can't go in and I'm in a wheelchair, right? And how is that going to look? Because that might require me to need help. And is there going to be help for me to have? But I want to serve God in that way. I feel God called me in that way. That's my vocation, right? God called me in that way. You know, what about homeless, right? We have homeless people that, you know, how do they want to have a voice. They want to be a part. You know, just like all of us, we all want to be a part. We all want to feel like we have a purpose and a meaning. And we all do. You know, God tells us to love one another. That's our purpose and meaning really in life, is to lift each other up and love each other. So kind of thinking about that, and kind of listening as we're kind of going through, I kind of was like, okay, what can I give you briefly as a counselor to help you kind of learn how to use your voice in some sense, some way? And so we talk about DBT, right? So DBT, you got a triangle again. Triangles are all over the place if you ever look at things. The bottom part is about our values. It's the foundation of our relationship is our values, right? The things that are important to us. So honesty, truth, a lot of us, right? Caring for one another. So we could go on and on. What are those values, right? And some of us have some variations, but some of us have a lot of similarities. The big difference is how do we support those values, right? That's really where we all have different views and where it's hard to come together because we all believe in truth and honesty, but then how do we come together or make that happen, right? Where some people, you know, honesty for some people gets them in more trouble than it did any good in their family. You know, we see that in the family structure, right? It was easier to lie because then I could get around what was going on and I wouldn't get smacked up against the face or beat up or, you know, all this other stuff. So, you know, or other stuff that's happening within the family, right? So there's this whole thing of, you know, truth and honesty. How far does it get you? And who you are and what does that look like, right? So we think that we might have all the same values, and we might, but what does that value look like is going to be different for people, right? Only be truthful with the people you can trust. Be honest with the people you trust. That might be somebody's value. Anybody else, it doesn't matter, right? That might be their value. So what does that look like, right? So we got the triangle. So we have our values as our foundation, right? So one of the things that we know is that when people get stuck in having a voice or learning or using their voice, it's part of acceptance commitment therapy. We call it ACT. We work at accepting the things that you can't change and change the things that you can change, right? So acceptance, commitment, and then therapy, right? And so that's part of it, is looking at, okay, what can I change my values? Do I have to change things? And to support my relationships, the foundation of my relationships, and what I want out of relationship. One side of the triangle is all about your boundaries. Because you can't have good relationships if you don't have good boundaries. Part of it, if you're saying yes all the time to everybody, then what happens is we're constantly selling out our boundaries. Oftentimes, I've ran into somebody one time that was running around, and ran up to Costco, and I asked them how they were doing because I hadn't seen them in a while. And they said, "Oh my God, I'm burned out. I can't do this anymore." And I said, "Well, how are your boundaries doing?" And they go, "Well, what boundaries?" And they go, "I didn't even think about that." And I was like, "Well, maybe you should say no." Like, that's just as important of learning when to say yes to something. So boundaries is important to relationships. So when you're in relationship, whether agency or targetship, boundaries is important. Understanding when to say yes, when to say no. Am I just saying yes because I want to do this? Or is this really where I'm called to do, right? Am I doing this and then I'm going to do it resentfully? And then I'm going to take away the voice from the people I'm interacting with, right? I'm not adding to the voice. I'm taking away from the voice. So it's important to understand your boundaries. Otherwise, your relationships get all wonky. Because on top of this pyramid is the board, right? And you're on one side and everybody else is on the other, right? The other side of this triangle is about nurturing relationships. We call it give. It's about learning how to be gentle, interested, validating, and easy-mannered with people. That's part of it. And so that's the other side of the support beams to this triangle of relationships. So when we look at this, one of the things that I often see that people struggle with, it's not really the giving. People are great givers. I think this is why God, we have discernment. And I love people who are givers. It's so important. I've learned to appreciate that so much, to be somebody who's a giver. But the problem is when we are overgiving, we don't understand sometimes we are also interfering with their growth and their challenges that they may have to go through. This is why we need discernment, because we need to balance the relationship, making sure that we're giving when we need to give and making sure that we're setting boundaries when we need to give. And what does that look like? That's everybody's own decision. This is the same thing with agency and targetship. When as an agent do I need to speak up for those in targetship? When in agency do I need to step back? When I'm a target, when do I need to speak up and share my voice? Because I need to be heard, because this isn't working and this isn't fair to me and I'm the one that knows because this is the one that's hurting. And when do I need to maybe take some time and just sit back, right? All of us have a moment where we need to step forward, step back. It's a dance. We all do this, right? And it's figuring out that balance to that teeter-totter. And that's why Pastor Peter said last time, I can't tell you what to do with this. I don't know how to use it. I can't tell you the skills. You're going to have to figure it out. But you have information now to go out and figure that out. But it's a dance. Communication and relationship is a dance. Okay, so I printed this out, and I thought this was really good. The first one, this is kind of when you, when people kind of struggle with, what I see is when they're really nurturing individuals. Not all nurturing, right? But oftentimes when I talk about selling out the boundaries, or we talk about wanting to be liked. I hear this a lot of times from my client, I want to be liked. And it's like, sometimes you got to let go of being liked to have a voice. Sometimes it's not always about being liked. It's saying the truth. It's saying honesty. It's saying what needs to be heard. It's about saying the uncomfortable thing in the room that nobody wants to hear. Sometimes that's what having voices means. The second one on here, know exactly what you're going to say and when. That's always good if you got time to plan it. Sometimes we don't. But if you have opportunity to rehearse or practice or kind of get it down to what you want to be said, it's important to take that time. The worst thing that I've ever seen happen is people go in to use their voice and they ended up getting gaslit and everything gets flipped on them. because they didn't have a preset plan. And when you go in, you need to sometimes have a preset plan to conversations of what do I want? What is this doing, and what do I want? Right? And when somebody starts gaslighting, switching it, you have to repeat the same thing. You don't change your messaging to counter back. You just are a broken record. You say the same thing over and over again. And you don't change it. Because that's the thing, is they get you off topic, they switch you and it changes, and next thing it's something else. So it's sticking to the topic. And anytime anything starts going off the topic, you got to pull it back on topic. So that's a way to kind of have voice, right? Because we're not going to lose it when we're staying where we need to be in the lanes, right? Think about your language. It talks about cut out filtering your language and state things plainly. Now, I read a study one time that as women, we usually say I'm sorry before we ask a question. That's pretty common. I haven't heard this too many when I was in some of the positions I've had. When I worked with men, I've learned that they speak a different language than me. It was real obvious to me when I was in my position and sitting in a meeting and I was the only female in the room. And I realized that it's same language, it's English, but it's different. And I realized that we have a tendency to expand and expel on things. Men are just straight, direct to the point. And that's one of the things we learn in business school, right? So as I started reading some books, I learned that sometimes you got to be just straight and to the point. But as women, that throws everybody off guard. And if you're straight and to the point, then you're just seen as, you know what. So, so that can be a little bit of a problem, right? So delivery is everything in doing that. You know, somebody one time told me, you know, do it with a smile on your face. Laugh afterward. You know, you do these little things. You learn these tricks, right, to deliver what you need to deliver. So the thing is one of the things that can really help is not fluffing things up. You know, sometimes we just need to be able to say what we need to say and move on, you know. And so that's one of the things we can get too much into. In nonviolent communication, we talk about, instead of I think, we talk about I think, I feel. You know this, right, Ruth? I think, I feel. We talk about this in a lot of nonviolent communication. One of the best things I ever saw was Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote a book on nonviolent communication, blow up on stage. I loved it because it goes to show that we're all human and we're not always good at even following our own advice. And so it was really something I took away, because up until then, I always thought, you know, we should always be able to carry on conversations really well without conflict. And what I saw was somebody who wrote books on not having conflict have conflict. And I went, none of us are perfect at this. And it was really kind of like humanizing to me. Like somehow, okay, I'm not perfect, and neither is this guy that's really great at this. So, but in nonviolent, when we're talking about this type of stuff, when we're talking about setting boundaries and that type of thing and having voice, we don't want to hear you, I think, I feel. That's considered fluff. We don't want to necessarily go there. And we don't have to say it in a stern voice or anything, right? And so we want to be concise with our message, and we want to do our best to remove some of those filtering. Filtering is kind of like an automatic reflex to soften what we're going to say. So sometimes it's good, but it's not good in every communication style all the time. So next thing is consider your delivery. So your tone, your pace, your speed, your gesture, your posture. And that's why sometimes it's good to practice ahead of time if you're going to say something to somebody. We do sometimes this in counseling. We role model. We practice back and forth. If somebody wants to have a conversation with somebody, we may go, okay, well, let's practice that. What does that conversation look like? And I pretend like I'm, I don't know, Susie, their child, their teenage kid that's gone wild, and they're the parent, right? Or they're the child, and they need to speak to their parent. There's an ism, right? So ageism, right? So we got a child that needs to speak to a parent about something, and they keep not being heard. And that's what's creating the turmoil in the family, because the child isn't being heard because parent knows best, and maybe the parent does know best and parent is right, but they're not really hearing and validating the child as they go. So what we do is we work on tone, posturing, everything with the child. We work on how do you deliver your messages. As adult, this is one of the things that we do, is we learn to deliver our message in a certain way so we can be heard and we can have a conversation, right? Part of it is, too, I would tell you this, in having a voice, one of the things that is important, and we do this all the time as counselors, is we read body language. And sometimes those body language, what we're reading can be wrong, it can be incorrect, so we always ask. So that's the thing that can be really good, is to ask. I see that you're very upset today. Are you doing okay? Are you upset? Is there something I did wrong? No. No. So, we want to validate, verify that what we're seeing in the person. So part of healthy communication and having a voice has to do a lot of times with identifying what's happening in the person. I know a lot of times people will raise their voice in intensity and everything else when they're high on, when anxiety increases. And so they get really short and they get really angry and upset. But it has more to do with the anxiety. I've had people blow up in my office pacing, and I've been able to talk them out of it and come down and be able to calm it down. And they said, nothing works for me. I just get angry, and that's it. And it's I love it when that happens, because when something is really happening and it's in the counseling room, we can actually coach them through it. So that's the thing, is that there's always things and ways that we're responding and reacting that is going on within the intensity of what we're feeling, or that we're triggering a thought. Mind, body, and our thoughts are all interconnected. And sometimes we're triggering a thought from our past, and that's creating the conflict and the insecurities. So I included in there a form of communication. It's BIF. I don't know why I have brief written up there. Because it's a brief form of communication? What do you think, Patty? Why did I do that? Is this one of my spelling things again? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Why, I was thinking it was the whole thing. It's BIF, though. I was getting those two confused. Okay, so BIF is a type of language communication style that you can use. BIF is about communicating. And it's kind of a great example of the stuff up above. So we keep it brief, we keep it informative, that's sticking to the facts, right? We don't add the fluff to the language. We're friendly, but we're also firm, right? So we kind of set a firm tone a little bit. It doesn't have to be yelling or screaming to get our way, but setting a firm tone. Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that?
Sarah and I were in a class once, and the expression was used, and we've never let go of it. It was so good. It was clarity with kindness.
Clarity with kindness, yeah.
Was what they said. And
Yeah.
I think the clarity is like you have here about how do you say what you need to say. Don't beat around the bush, but get to your point. But also, I think it's mainly men that I've worked with over the years who, well, I just tell it like it is, Pastor. And I want to be like, yeah, but no one told you had to be an asshole. And so that's where the kindness comes in. Like, how do you speak directly, but still do it in love, with compassion and
Right.
kindness, which is
And
the
kindness.
friendly
Right.
piece here. So that has always held
Right.
on to that clarity with kindness.
Right. One of the things that we know with when we work with people that we had the power and control earlier, when we see people that are doing gaslighting or manipulation or anything like that, the more fluff you give them, the more they use it against you. So actually, BIF actually came out of a movement from the 80s, parental alienation.
Say that again.
Parent alienation, where the kids were being used to against one. The kids were being used in the middle against each parent, and the kids had to basically choose sides and get cut off from one parent because of manipulation, control. It was power and control will, but instead being used on kids. And so BIF is kind of language that they learned that came out of that, because anytime we saw with domestic violence or anything else, anytime we use any fluff, it gets exaggerated or twisted or used against you. Yeah. So, yeah. So I thought it was important to remind us with everything as we've gone through the agency and targetship, is to remind us what God says about us. And that when we say, like, it's impossible, all things are possible. Or we say, nobody really loves me, God says he loves us. You know? I can't forgive myself, but God says I forgive you. You know? So just important reminders, because sometimes when we're in our targetship or we've lost our voice, we need reminders of how special we are and how much we matter to Christ when we don't feel like we matter to anybody else. You know? So that's all that handout is. And then we're going to finish it up with the last thing. This here was a poem. The thing that you're getting here was a poem that was given to me by my mentor. You guys heard me share my testimony not too long ago in church here. And Darrell Brown was my counselor, and that I call her my Yoda. She's my Yoda. But she's the Christian counselor that I had that never tried to change me. She followed my lead and got me involved. I think I got involved in Exodus at that time. I got involved in Love in Action. I was going to all these things about changing who you are. And I was there for a lot of different reasons than other people were. I was really there because I wanted to figure out, how am I going to be a Christian and how am I going to be gay at the same time, because I'd already tried both of those worlds, one without the other, and it didn't work. And this was after I had attempted that suicide, was looking at attempting that suicide. And so, but she's a real amazing, special lady in my life. Patty's met her. And she's just done amazing work. She's ran a whole counseling ministry. You pay as you go or pay what you can. And God has provided for her and kept her. And she's just done amazing work. So she's a big mentor for me. And so I really thought, covering this whole thing on patriarch, I thought it would be good to end with this lovely poem. And I would love it if we could take, where's the microphone at?
Yep.
Right there. Okay. So if we could take this, and if we can have somebody read the first paragraph and then pass it back and just keep going around here maybe and get until we've got everyone read to the very end there. I would really enjoy that, to hear all you do this. Pass it. I know you look like you're excited. So this is called You Are God's Unique Woman.
You are special to God. In all the world, there's nobody like you. Since the beginning of time, there has never been another like you. No one has your smile. No one has your eyes, your nose, your hair, your hands, or your voice. You are special.
No one can be found who has your unique handwriting. Nobody anywhere has your taste for food, music, or art. No one sees things just as you do. In all of time, there has never been no one who laughs like you. What makes you laugh and cry will never provoke identical laughter and tears from anyone else ever. No one reacts to a given situation just as you would react. You are special.
I've read.
You are the only one in all creation who has your individual set of abilities. Oh, there will always be someone who's better at one of the things you're good at. However, no one can reach the quality of your combination of talents, ideas, and feelings. Like a room full of musical instruments, some may excel alone, but none can match the symphony found when all are played together. You are a symphony.
Through all of eternity, no one will think like you. You are indeed unique. You are without a doubt a rare gem of God's creation. In all rarity, there is usually great value. Because of your rare value, you need not attempt to imitate others. God accepts you. The angels rejoice in who you are. As sisters in Christ, let us celebrate our differences.
God made you for a very special purpose. You were not an accident. God must have a job for you that no one else can do as well as you can. Out of all the billions of applicants, only one is qualified. Only one has the right combination of what it will take to accomplish God's purpose in your life. That one is you, because you are God's unique woman.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I hope you guys can feel through this. You know, we've done 5 weeks of courses together, and I hope that, you know, you've learned something along the way. There's information you can take away, and if there's stuff you want to leave at the door, you can leave it. You don't have to take everything that was set up here with you, you know. But I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit with you guys. And just talk about a little bit that God has done work in my life, because really what I'm sharing here today is some of the stuff that God's given me. But also, you know, I don't got it all figured out. You know, I don't have everything figured out. I'm just presenting what God has shown me. And I just want, more than anything, my big thing is, as a counselor, I want to teach people how to have a voice. I want to teach people how to build confidence and speak up and gain allyship and be able to step out of those moments of targetship. So, but I know we can't do that without agencies, people of agency beside our side. So I thank you for the opportunity I've had to talk and speak and share with all of you during this time. I'm done.
I want to thank both you and Peter for all the homework you've done. It's been amazing to me in each class we've been able to do 3. How much work you've done to prepare for this class, and the handouts and the information. And, you know, we've needed the Sunday school class for so long, or an adult class, whatever you want to call it. So I hope
Yeah.
this continues.
Yeah. I think we're going to do more of these to come. Claudia, there, go ahead.
While all these good brains are.
Let's give you a mic for this.
It should be on.
I turned it off, sorry. Is it better?
There you go.
Yes, we do want to do more of these in the future. And while all of you who have been faithfully attending are right here, if you have ideas about what you would like to learn more about, or people that you'd like to hear more from, let Pastor know, or me, or who else was involved in this? Susan Pickens was? Susan? Who else, Pastor?
Yeah. Who was at that meeting? Yeah, it was you and Susan and I,
Yeah,
and Trish has been a part of it.
yep, and Trish.
Yeah.
So let one of us know, because Julie's coming next week, and after that,
Yeah.
I
not
have
much.
ideas, but you're actually,
Yeah.
it's the very next email on my list is Claudia's. So
Oh.
Tuesday morning, you get an email from me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the goal
Okay.
is to have some more of these coming. And so I know Claudia and I have met and talked about it, and
But I know somebody here's got stuff rattling around in their brain,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, so, bring stuff forward if there's something you want to share. I don't think that we have to be an expert in everything. Part of this is really just about learning and growing. Like I said, I just love to hear from me personally. I like to hear people and hear from people and hear people's stories and what God's told them. And I get to believe it or not, or I get to take away from that what I want. But it's nice to know that wherever I'm at least God is working in that person's life and doing some amazing things. So, I think it's important to, we're not going to be here next week, but sorry, I feel bad we're going to miss it because it would be good to be up. But yeah, so, but I think it's really important if you have something to share, you want to teach something, or there's something God's given you. We had some wonderful testimonies at church this last week, and for the last month. We did five, yeah, through Epiphany. So, maybe it's an opportunity to share your testimony that you've always wanted to share with a group and never had that opportunity. And it's a great way to do that too, I think. So I'm sure there's lots of things coming. You had something.
Yeah, you were talking about the women. You were talking about the women of the Bible, and how they didn't have a voice, and a lot of the apostles were killed and beheaded, and one of them is a bloodline to the Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
And a lot of books have been lost. They're called the Gnostics, and I've seen online, but she had a voice, and Jesus loved Martha and Mary.
Yeah.
And Mary, I believe, was the one he was talking about with the Magdala, because in the Gnostics it talks about how she was the head of the church, and she was a woman too. And she's also my bloodline from my mom and my dad's side in the Hells Grails, and also my mother's side is the Christ bloodline. So I just wanted to let you guys know that, that you should never step down. Jesus and Martin Luther King said, when you become silent, that's when it's wrong, and I used to be an activist, so you should never step down. You should always have a voice to speak up and tell people what's right, and stand up for the people that are homeless, and I don't believe that, I was looking at this Roman law and stuff, that the Salvation Army should have all the control of the coordinated entry for the reliable apartments, because I'm homeless, and I've been homeless for almost 2.5 years because of the flood. And the awning that, or what do you call it, the side out, that's to my trailer, and they refuse to help us. So some people out there don't get the help they need, and they're hurt down there. So other churches need to step in and take over.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because, that's a great example of just having voice right there for what is happening in our community. And
College too.
yeah.
I go to college and I've been discriminated 8 times.
Yeah. And biblical women had voices. We talked about that. So I think that's off. But yeah, but you're right. It's like we need to have voice. It's important.
The
Yeah.
younger picked over the older, and I have the privilege to work there,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
was turned away.
Yeah. I appreciate that you shared. Yeah. Appreciate that. Yeah. Very cool. All right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I would give a pastoral. Yeah.